to welcome you all to the third day of our conference. And for those of you who will be watching this on a video, I want to remind you, as I did yesterday, that the sounds of the city you will hear during the presentations, which we have obviously no control over, but we are directly across the street from the Giiza Plateau and are very fortunate to be able to have this particular spot for the conference, because it makes everything even far more profoundly interesting, because as the speakers are talking about the Great Pyramid, we can just look out the window and see the Great Pyramids here. So we're that close to the Giiza Plateau, and we're very happy to be able to have the kind of speakers talking with us today about this. Now, yesterday we had Chistopher Dunn and Alan Alfred, and they only did one half of the presentation, so we'll have the second half of the presentations today. And Chistopher Dunn talked with us about the actual nuts and bolts of the pyramid as a power source and its connection with the earth. I cannot bring myself to believe that anything as monstrous and as profoundly brilliant as the building of the Great Pyramid was for a funeral or a burial chamber for a pharaoh. In point of fact, no pharaoh was ever found in a pyramid, and this is something that the audience needs to remember. The pharaohs are buried in the Valley of the Kings, not in the pyramid. The pyramid has a very important purpose by the ones who designed and built it. And so to learn more about that, let's get back to what we were talking about yesterday with Chistopher Dunn on the Great Pyramid of Giza. And thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes? Yes?
The general said he cannot make any more
Okay.
for the Great Pyramid. Hey, we can't get in any other time.
We can't get in the Great
So
Pyramid.
Friday day,
Friday day.
if that's okay, it's still full moon.
That's fine.
New moon.
We'll take what we can get. Hello, friends. Before I get into the nuts and bolts of the Great Pyramid, from my perspective, and everybody, the Great Pyramid is many things to many people. If you read the acknowledgments in my book, you'll know how I really feel about my quest for knowledge in this world today. And I am privileged and honored to have my name on the cover of this book, because this is not my book. This book belongs to many, many people. And if you read the acknowledgments, you will read just a few names of those who have helped me in my quest. And so we are brought here today to discuss a subject that has puzzled and confounded so many people for so many years. This is why we are drawn to Egypt, because we know the answers are here. When you live in a society, as a family, as a community. And this is something I learned since emigrating to the United States in 1969. That when you live in a community or a family, it is very important to have a connectivity from one generation to the other. This is why there's such an interest in genealogy, because we need to know what our roots are. And this is why we're all questing to know what our true roots are. And we know in our hearts, in our minds, in our souls, that those roots lie here in Egypt. Now, when I started out on this quest, I was working from the right side of my brain. It was inductive, intuitive, but then I switched to the left side of my brain. And many of the authors that came before me learned very hard lessons about how they present information and how they are going to change people's mindsets and bring them into the light, to the understanding that our history goes back much further and that we are much more than just physical bodies. But when you actually present information to the general public, if you don't have measurable data and you can't actually demonstrate that what you're telling them has some basis in physical reality, your work does not reach the wider audience that you need to reach. And so what I have in the Giiza power plant is mostly left brain material. It's an analysis, a reverse engineering, if you will, of the Great Pyramid. And it is actually an analysis of all the internal arrangements, every feature within the Great Pyramid. All the anomalous substances, the materials that we used. Why? 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 Those questions demanded answers. Why? Why is it like that? We've already dismissed the tomb theory, but the question why is still foremost in our mind. Most of us, a lot of us, believe intuitively that this pyramid has a higher purpose, a technological purpose, but we know that intuitively. As an engineer, I wanted to know how the thing worked. I wanted to know, can this thing actually operate? And the answer to that question, I believe, is yes. Now, what I would like to say, that like any engineering project, and we've got engineers in the room with us today, but like any engineering project that you get involved in, you start out with an idea. You draw up a design. You test the design. You change the design and test it again, and then change it again and test it again. It's an evolutionary process. Technology is evolutionary. Things just don't spring into existence, just like the Great Pyramid. It didn't spring into existence, placed down on the Giiza plateau by the hand of God, like some people in the past have proposed, because they cannot explain it. It was, in my view, the result of the evolution of technology, and was the actual pinnacle, the zenith of the technology of the ancient Khemitians who built it. There's still a lot of unanswered questions. I can't answer them. Other people who will speak later have answers for those unanswered questions. And they have the knowledge and the ability to present it. This knowledge and ability that I don't possess. So I've got a little piece of the puzzle too, but just a little piece. So when we question why, I question why this passageway leading down to a bedrock chamber existed. I mean, that's fundamental. Why did they do that? Why did they do that? When Petrie measured the accuracy of that particular shaft, over 150 feet of the constructed portion of the shaft was aligned within 10,000ths of an inch. I think we talked a little bit about precision yesterday, so I won't belabor that point. That's incredible, absolutely incredible, that they would be able to do that. And over the entire 350 feet, it was only out within a quarter of an inch. Now, can you imagine being down in that passageway, chiseling away, and achieving that kind of accuracy? You can't do it. You can't do it, folks. We're not doing it. We don't even think about it. We don't. We don't even think about doing that. If we want to get to an underground chamber, any way we can get down there is okay. And to say, well, I need to get to an underground chamber, but to do that, I've got to go down a really straight passage. We don't say that. Anything that we can, and also, if we want to go to an underground chamber, we'd like to have that passage a little more accommodating than 42 inches square. So I question why. And this enigma, the ascending passage, again, very small. What was it for? I question the shafts in the Queen's Chamber, the northern shaft. We talked a little bit about that yesterday. Alan touched on that. The northern shaft actually kinks around the Grand Gallery. And the southern shaft goes into the wall about three feet or so and then shoots off to a dead end. And the thing that I've found really profound and interesting about the Queen's Chamber was the fact that when early explorers went into the Queen's Chamber, they did not notice these shafts. Why? Because they had not been completed. They didn't make a complete connection to the inside of the chamber. They were terminated 5 inches short of the chamber. Why? It was only after Wayman Dixon in 1872 was able to push a rod, a small rod, through a crack in the wall, and he was able to push it at a fair distance, that he said, well, maybe there's something behind that. And he had it chiseled out and discovered the shafts. That's just one anomaly. That's just one question. Why? The other one is they retrieved some artifacts out of that shaft. And the artifacts that they retrieved were what they called a grapnel hook, which is actually, I'll draw it here. It's just shaped like that. What I want to do, I want to put some bullet points up on the flip chart so that as we go through it, you'll have those in front of you. And later on, we'll start to answer some of the questions that we're asking. Do I need to move that out? Or just... Okay. There was also a piece of cedar-like wood that had, and the grapnel hook and the cedar-like wood had they would have originally been joined together. So the question then becomes why? Why even have it? Also retrieved was a greenstone ball. I believe I found the answer to why we have a grapnel hook and cedar-like wood, but the greenstone ball is still a mystery to me. Maybe somebody here would have the answer. Not you? Also, within that chamber, within those shafts, the early explorers, Piazzi Smythe, he was the Astronomer Royal for Scotland, he noted that there was a white substance oozing from between the joints. He had it analyzed and found that it was gypsum. And the assumption was that they were using that to join the blocks. But in that area of the pyramid, they weren't using any cement to join the blocks. And the cement that they did have and used on the outside of the Great Pyramid was far superior than gypsum, and bound the blocks, sealed the blocks very closely, and it was, I don't think that particular substance has ever been analyzed. So the question then becomes, why that substance in the southern shaft? Well, that, as we will find out, is actually linked to another substance. It has a relationship to another substance that was found on the walls of the Queen's Chamber. And that substance was salt, a buildup of salt up to a half-inch thick that coated the wall of the chamber. So the question then is, why the salt? The speculation was that they had salt on the walls because after the great flood receded, it actually coated the wall. I question that because why do we not find a similar accumulation of salt in other areas of the pyramid, such as the horizontal passage, the ascending passage, and particularly the subterranean passage? And in order to build up that much salt on the wall, they would have had to have been inundated numerous times, and just that one chamber. Well, as it happens, it was inundated to a certain degree, but it was an intentional inundation. The Aska? Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to put up the bullet points of the questions that we're going to answer. Grapnel hook. Can you read this? Is it? No? Yeah? Is that better? Okay. Also, what really got me going on this, and why I developed the idea that this thing may have been generating energy, was that there was a lot of interest in pyramid power in the 1970s. I know there still is, but this pyramid power was viewed to be some kind of a spiritual energy, some kind of energy that we cannot explain, and have been unable to explain in physical terms, particularly to satisfy scientists. So my intuition told me, as I said yesterday, that this was actually a power plant and they were generating energy with it. And then the inspiration showed the energy not coming into the pyramid, but actually being pushed out through the shafts of the King's Chamber. And I go, aha, okay, let's look at the King's Chamber. And so, you know how much information, how much work, how much absolute brilliance is in the King's Chamber? It's brilliant. It's brilliant. You walk in there and you feel good. Do you know why? It's the vibes, man. Thousands of tons of granite. Thousands of tons of granite. And a very, very powerful force that affected that granite in prehistory when the power plant was operating. And that is the key. The walls were pushed out. The granite beams above the chamber were cracked. My theory is that they were actually pushed up and dropped down because they didn't crack in a natural settling mode. But they are now supported by just sticking and thrusting. In other words, it's like you get two square members together and one is actually leaning against the other. I puzzled over why there were 5 of them. Why are there 5 layers? And then something really strange happened to earlier explorers. When Howard Vyse, who was a colonel in the British Army, and he was given £10,000 from his family just to get him out of the country because he was an embarrassment to them, so he came over to Egypt. He did excavations. He did excavations with gunpowder. The scientific method, blow it. And because they couldn't cut through the granite beams or the granite, they actually resorted to gunpowder. And he discovered the upper air spaces above the King's Chamber. Before Howard Vyse went in there, they weren't aware of those upper chambers or upper air spaces. But now, from an architectural engineering viewpoint, those 5 layers, or the 4 layers, are actually redundant. You don't need them. You don't need those 4 layers. Look at it. Just look at it from a technical viewpoint. Those 4 layers are holding up no more than their own weight. And yet, the conventional theory of why they are there is that they were relieving chambers so that the masonry, so that the King Khufu could have a flat ceiling rather than a gabled ceiling. But if you look at it, what elements in that design are actually supporting the upper masonry? The top gable blocks. So the question then is why? Why? Look at the tops of the beams. The tops of the beams are not straight. They're not parallel. They're not square, like the 3 sides, such as the bottom and the 2 sides that join each other. They're rough. They've got holes gouged in them at different areas, especially in the upper air spaces. You'll see that there are holes gouged in the end. Oh, I'd love to see that there were holes gouged in the end. I read it in a good book that they were. So the question then is why? Why? It doesn't make sense. We have the answer. Where's my pen? And these, there are, do I need to, there are more mysteries than just the Queen's Chamber. Okay, I'll pick it up. Stephen, you're supposed to be helping me. No, that's okay. No, that's okay. That's all right. I'll just leave I'll leave the lid off of this, but it will probably dry up. I need a tool belt. Okay, so in the King's Chamber, we have questions to answer. The question of the expanded chamber, the powerful force. Then we have the question of the design of the beams, just the design of the beams. Sorry? Would you? Thanks. God bless you. I think it was becoming painfully obvious to Mary that I wasn't doing a very good job there.
I just wanted to lighten your load.
Thank you. Okay. So, what have we got so far? The expanded, the design, and why there is redundant granite. The reason for the redundant granite. That's okay. I'll tell you what. Maybe we shouldn't do the flip chart. Maybe we'll just talk it through, and that'll work okay. What do you think?
No, I'll just do it.
Okay. Oh. Okay. All right. Okay. Thanks. But then one of the other mysteries in the upper chamber is just above Davison's chamber. When Howard Vyse first made his exploration, you would find they found that when they walked into that chamber, this one right here, they came out covered with a very, very fine black powder. Now, the lower chamber, the lower airspace, and I don't have the passageway to it, but the lower airspace, it was covered with bat dung, because the bats used to live in fly around in the Great Pyramid, and they were all kind of bat dung. Can you imagine, though, being an early explorer, forcing yourself into that passage and walking around? Wonders of archaeology. I have a tremendous amount of respect for those people, tremendous amount of respect. But this is the initiation that you receive in Egypt. Sometimes you get in uncomfortable situations. So that's another question that we need to answer. The design has the answer. We just need to open our minds and see it for what it really is. And what it really is, in my view, is a coupled oscillator. The Great Pyramid, and Alan talked yesterday about the dimensions of the pyramid, its relationship to the Earth, the mass size to the Earth. It's a harmonic coupled oscillator. And what a coupled oscillator is if you have a large vibrating object and you attach another object to it that is harmonically tuned to that object. In other words, it's either vibrating at the same frequency, or it will vibrate at the same frequency, or a lower frequency or a higher frequency, but it's harmonic. In other words, when you look at the waves the sound waves, you're actually looking at this. And I'll take that one now. Can we turn that off? Could you hold that up, please? So what you have is time and energy and a wave, a sound wave, or vibration. The harmonic of a harmonic would be another wave that would actually look like this. And the coincidental waves here would actually amplify that particular note. So you would have a means of actually taking a lower frequency energy and raising it to a higher level by matching something harmonically and causing resonance in the object. And this is what we have with the Great Pyramid. And the wonderful thing about being able to be here and tell you this information is that only 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago now, there was an acoustics engineer by the name of Tom Danley who was funded by the Shore Foundation to conduct some acoustic studies in the Great Pyramid. And you know what he found? That the Great Pyramid is still humming, it's still vibrating to the frequency of the Earth. What he determined in 1996 was that the Great Pyramid, even with no input from him, because he took subwoofers and amplifiers in there, but even with no input from his equipment, he was detecting a low frequency vibration between 2 and 9 hertz, 2 cycles per second, 9 cycles per second, infrasonic. So where does the sound come from? Where does the vibration come from? It comes from the Earth. Now there's another thing that you need to know, and that is that this is not all the energy that you can generate in the Great Pyramid just by allowing it to sit there. There is equipment that has been removed from the Great Pyramid, equipment that if you were able to replicate it and put it into place, you would be able to get the pyramid running again. And what that equipment is, a part of that equipment, is actually a device. It would be a device to cause the pyramid to oscillate. In other words, it would prime the pump, so to speak, and the pyramid would then start drawing energy from the Earth again at a greater amount. Now, how did I come to that conclusion? Actually, I kind of backed into it, and it was only through an analysis and an engineering analysis of the internal structure and answering the questions within the Great Pyramid that I backed into this idea that it was responding to the vibrations of the Earth. So, more evidence. This is basically what the Giiza power plant describes in a nutshell, and then we'll go through some other evidence. The reason for the Queen's Chamber and the salt on the walls of the Queen's Chamber was actually a chemical reaction. From the evidence that I have seen there, it was a chemical reaction. Now, Stephen Mailer, he will come up later this week, and he has another view of that. And that's great, because I think everybody has a piece of the information. But what they were doing was having a chemical reaction in there, and they were creating hydrogen. The reason I say that is these shafts were not air shafts. They were supply shafts to the Queen's chamber. The crack in the wall was actually just a small hole that allowed a metered amount of chemical to come into the chamber. And you have to have two chemicals in this process, and the two chemicals would be hydrated zinc chloride solution, that's one possibility, or a dilute hydrochloric acid solution, very dilute, but that would come into the chamber, mix on the floor, and boil off hydrogen. Hot hydrogen would react to the limestone, which is calcium carbonate, and it would leach salts from the wall. It would give up its impurities. Limestone is used as a drying agent. And then it would flow across the horizontal passage, giving up more of its impurities and moisture. And there was indeed salt, a small amount of salt found on the walls of the horizontal passage and also the lower part of the ascending passage. But then what you have is clean hydrogen that is filling the internal structure and rising to the level of the King's chamber. And before you get to the King's chamber, you go through this enigmatic device, I call it. It's the antechamber. Now, they call it an antechamber because in Egyptian tombs there was normally more than one room. A room where they would keep treasures and things of that nature. But this chamber is very unique in that the design of it has been a puzzle for centuries. Yeah. There are slots on the side walls. There are round grooves on this face wall here before you actually get into the passageway to go into the chamber. And there is this block that is just suspended between the wall of the inside of the chamber, and there's about a 20-some-inch gap between them. Here we're going into the King's chamber. So, in the Giiza power plant, to answer the question of why these chamber walls were expanded, why we had all these granite beams that were just rough finished on the top, why there was exuviae on the inside of the wall, I mean on the top of these beams, and other enigmas, was that there was an explosion in prehistory, a huge explosion. You could, analogous to a meltdown, where the hydrogen exploded, pushed the walls apart, pushed them away, forced the granite beams up, they dropped back down, they cracked, and something happened in this area right here, and also probably in this area, most likely. And the question of where the exuvia is, what is exuviae? It is the cast-off shells and skins of insects. And that has been the mystery. Where did this dust come from? Where did the insects come from? There were no insects found in the Great Pyramid. And there's no other area in the Great Pyramid that had this kind of substance. What I'm proposing is that that particular substance was probably, more than likely, in this chamber too. But because there was a hole between this chamber and the top of the Grand Gallery, they were able to go in there, probably clean it up, and anything that was left over was covered over with or mixed in with bat dung. So what we had is the black powder in this area. Where did it come from? And what I propose is it actually came from the limestone core masonry. And it went through a transformation at the time of the explosion. Can you imagine the thunderous shuddering of that chamber as hydrogen exploded, elevated temperatures, heat, vibration? What would happen to the limestone core masonry? It would, if you just walk around the Serapeum, well, we're not going to go there, but sadly, but walking around the Serapeum, then the limestone bedrock tunnels, you kick up limestone dust and you can see it laying heavily in the air. So what I believe happened was that the surface layers of the limestone core blocks actually sloughed off, were suspended in the air in that chamber, and burned through the elevated temperatures, and then finally settled on the top of the granite beams. So that answers one mystery. Well, it's a possible solution to one mystery. Don't want to be too arrogant. These beams, these granite beams, 55% silicon quartz crystal, each one of them tuned. How do you tune a bell? Anybody know how you tune a bell? You selectively remove material until you achieve the correct frequency. So each beam cut square originally and flat, probably, selected for the unique characteristics, and then suspended on the ends and worked on the top. Carved, gouged. Let's remove a little bit of material here, strike it. Let's see what the frequency is. Okay, we need to change that frequency just a little bit more. Okay, we need to cut some off of here. We need to cut more off of here than here because the distribution of the quartz within the granite is not even throughout. And the elasticity of the beam is not constant across the entire length of the beam. And you want that granite beam to vibrate, and you want that granite beam to vibrate and emit energy evenly into the king's chamber. And so every one of them, and there are 43 of those granite beams, weighing up to 70 tons apiece. 70 tons. Brought 500 miles down the Nile and installed in the Great Pyramid. 70 tons apiece. A higher purpose? I think so. And this is what I'm talking about when we ask the question about the redundant granite. What we have in the Queen's chamber is a design that works very well. It has the gabled blocks, the ceiling blocks, that withstands more masonry than the gabled blocks above the King's chamber. It works very well. All you would need in the King's chamber, if you wanted a flat ceiling, would be to just span it with one layer. You don't need 5 layers. This is the really neat stuff. Why do we feel that vibration within the King's chamber? Because the king's chamber was designed and built to vibrate freely, without restraint. The walls are not tied in to the core masonry. There is a gap, a space, outside the king's chamber. So it's allowed to vibrate freely, without any damping. What Tom Danley found too was that the floor vibrated without damping too, with little damping, because he detected that it was suspended on nodes, like an egg carton. And if it was actually laid flat against a flat surface, then it would not ring or it would not resonate with the frequencies. I found that out too in 1995. When I came over to Egypt in 1995, I took a monochromatic tuner and also my tape recorder into the Great Pyramid. A monochromatic tuner is what they use to tune guitar strings or musical instruments. And essentially, it just gives you the frequency of the note that you are playing or singing. And I took the monochromatic tuner in there just to determine what the exact frequency of that chamber was. I'd already read that it was 438 cycles per second, but I wanted to check it out for myself. Now what happened was I had paid the inspector of the Giza Plateau $150 to be left alone inside the Great Pyramid for about an hour. Well, it was Friday, Ramadan, and and so my time was cut short. But I also wanted to check out the electromagnetic radiation, or the existence of radio waves in this chamber, because the granite has unique properties in the quartz crystal. It has piezoelectric properties, and if you stress it mechanically, it will emit an electrical signal. Likewise, if you input electricity across certain axes, it will vibrate mechanically. We have them in our quartz watches, and that's how they drive our watches. So I was looking for the frequency of electromagnetic radiation while I was in there. Now what happened, though, was I asked Mohammed to turn off the lights while I was in there, because I did not want any electrical noise. I wanted to be, no power at all going through any wires, because the device I had, the instrument I had, was a digital frequency counter, and it's designed just to pick up radio waves. And I just wanted to know exactly what the frequency of radio waves was in that chamber. So I had the tape recorder mounted, well, it was on the block right next to the sarcophagus, or the box, and the light still hadn't been turned out. And I was getting concerned because my 45 minutes was almost up, and I walked out through this passageway onto the great step, and I yelled down the Grand Gallery, and I said, "Turn off the lights!" Lights. So, and then I came back into the chamber, and they finally turned off the lights. And I thought, thank God for that. But there was a problem. In 1993, Gantenbrink had installed a fan in, well, I don't show the picture of it there, but the southern shaft, the opening of the southern shaft, he had installed a fan, and that was running. The fan was running, and there was no way I could get it turned off. There was a lockbox at the entrance to the Great Pyramid where they have the switch for that fan, and Nobody had a key. And now they have a new one that's even louder. However, I found something very unusual. I went back to my room and I played that tape recorder back. And I had my monochromatic tuner and the tape recorder side by side. And I didn't realize that I had the monochromatic tuner turned on. But I was playing the tape recorder back, and what I found was that when I walked through this chamber right here, through this passageway and out onto the great step, every footstep that I took caused the chamber to ring. It rang, and you know what the frequency was? 440. Yeah. So that the whole chamber, even striking the floor with your footsteps, causes it to ring. Also, while I was in the chamber, I was doing some intoning. And, you know, Muhammad, he thought I was going in there to meditate. And that's fine. He really did. He thought I was going to meditate. And I didn't, you know, tell him any differently. I just thought it would be a good idea to keep my mouth shut. And, but the other thing that I noticed, when I was intoning and resonating the chamber, the tape recorder actually detected higher overtones to the frequency that I was humming or chanting. And those overtones were detected by the tape recorder. I couldn't hear them while I was in there because all I could hear was my own voice and my own, you know, the frequency that I was intoning. But it's absolutely incredible. And that is key to the power plant theory, is that what we are doing, if we go back to the idea of a coupled oscillator, everybody knows that the Earth does not vibrate very, very quickly. It has a fundamental pulse. And that frequency is actually the same frequency that Tom Danley detected, between 2 and 9 hertz. And you know what, last year, scientists actually detected that the Earth had a hum. And I read that in a newspaper, and I said, they only just found that out? I mean, I thought it was common knowledge. But anyway, what we have then is a device of a high order of technology within this area. Let me cycle through these again. How were they feeding the energy into that chamber? And this is where we answer some of the mysteries in the ascending passage. And in the ascending passage, there are several features that are anomalous. Along the ramps that go up to the king's chamber, there are slots cut in the wall, in the floor of the ramps. And these are equally spaced up the length of the passageway. Now the slots, there are 27 pairs in all. The explanation for them, as described by Egyptologists in some of their theories, is that they had wooden wedges in the slots and they held back the granite plugs that they eventually slid down the ascending passage to jam in the mouth after the funeral had finished, which is a totally impossible theory. It's wrong. You don't need 27 slots for 3 plugs anyway. So what I had detected, or what I had theorized, was that within the Grand Gallery, because of its acoustical qualities, and it has different acoustic qualities than the King's Chamber. The King's Chamber will vibrate and resonate. However, the Grand Gallery does not in the same way. It does something different, and this was detected by Paul Horn when he made his album Inside. He played his flute inside, and he noted in his little booklet that came with the album that when he tested the resonance in the Grand Gallery, they sounded rather flat. It did not get the reverberation that he got in the King's Chamber. And then he noted that something strange happened. There was a sound coming from somewhere else. When he played his flute out on the Great Step, the sound was going out into the Grand Gallery, and it was through a series of reflections being focused through the passageway into the King's Chamber. Isn't that amazing? When Atlantis Rising published an article on the Giiza power plant, they noted, Doug Kenyon noted in a little blurb on the side, that he had been contacted by a military scientist who was involved in a think tank, and what they'd done a study of the Great Pyramid, the internal arrangement of the Great Pyramid, and had concluded that it could have been used as a mighty sonic weapon. Now that's a military scientist thinking. You know, that it would be a sonic, they'd use it as a weapon. What else would they use technology for anyway? Yeah. And then Doug got a hold of my book, and he wrote an endorsement for it. And also, the other part of that was that the geometries and the architecture inside the Great Pyramid far exceed anything that we believe is attributable to ancient societies. Way, way beyond primitive architecture. Way beyond. And the Grand Gallery has always been described as a miracle in architecture. And hopefully we'll see that sometime this week. So what I proposed was, because we have a low frequency vibration, and we know that the King's Chamber is still vibrating in response to the Earth. And because it's a low frequency, we need to raise the frequency. We need to take it higher, ramp it up, step it up. And in order to do that, we have to do it through a harmonic series. And we go through several harmonic resonators that actually respond, just like the King's Chamber responded to my voice and responded with a higher frequency. They had to collect the energy in the Grand Gallery, because to drive the King's Chamber to resonance and to output the energy that you need to output, you need more energy than what you can collect just in that chamber itself. That's why they built the Grand Gallery. They built the Grand Gallery so that they could collect more energy that was passing through and actually focus it into the King's Chamber. It's a brilliant piece of architecture. Brilliant. Now, this is just a theory. And like any engineer who starts out with a design, I'm not saying it's bulletproof. I'm not saying it's perfect. But it's just a theory. When you look at what we know today about physics, about science and sound, this is what we come up with as a starting point in trying to understand what they were doing. And what I propose is that we have a Helmholtz, what is called a Helmholtz resonator. And a Helmholtz resonator is a device that if you bring a vibrating source to it, like a tuning fork, it actually loads the fork. And that's the term that they use. It draws that energy out of the fork in a shorter period of time than what the fork would give up naturally. In other words, if you struck two tuning forks an equal amount at the same time, you held one and allowed it to vibrate and hum, and then you placed the other one near a Helmholtz resonator, this one would hum louder and shorter. So what you have then is a possible device that could actually draw that energy and amplify it. And as long as you've got a power source to drive that, such as the Earth, the Earth has a huge amount of energy, but as long as you've got a power source, you can continue to draw that energy. This is a free energy device. Now, I was talking to Alan the other day, and we're talking about the slots along the Grand Gallery wall. And these slots, they're a puzzle. I mean, they're three layers up. The design of the walls is that they are stepped in as they get higher. The gallery is 28 feet high, 62 inches wide at the bottom, and 42 inches wide at the top on a 26-degree angle. So the question was, okay, well, what were the slots? And there are other theories. There are other theories about how this is a functional device, and other, brilliant ideas about how it could have been used. My position is that whatever they were doing in there, it had to be maintenance-free, because they weren't going to be able to get in there to do any adjusting. They weren't going to be able to go in there and oil anything that was moving. So whatever they were doing, they locked it up, they sealed it up, and it ran. And their control was probably down in the descending passage by the granite plugs. So as I puzzled over the Grand Gallery, I saw a purpose for these slots in that a series of resonators that brought that energy to a higher frequency corresponded with each of the corbelled layers as you moved up to the top of the Grand Gallery. But just as practical devices, the slots were used to secure them in place. And then the slots in the ramp were used for the base of the resonator housing. Another remarkable feature that people have noted in the past is that the ceiling of the Grand Gallery is tilted inwards. They're tiled and they're tilted inwards. And using the rough dimensions, and I say rough because it's very difficult to take measurements of something 28 feet high and on a 26-degree angle. But the rough dimensions showed me that the tilt actually approximated a 45-degree angle. If you take into consideration the number of tiles, the distance that was measured between the bottom of the tilt and the top of the next one, and it approximated a 45-degree angle. Now, if you want to direct sound through a passageway into the King's Chamber, you have a surface there that is going to do that. And so with all the resonators installed and humming, that sound can do nothing more than be focused through to the King's Chamber. And then I started to look at some of the bowls in the Cairo Museum, and I'm thinking, look at the shape of this one with an exponential horn on the end. And I wonder why. I don't say conclusively that it is a Helmholtz resonator, but I wonder why they saw fit to create this device. And then I question all the other bowls that don't seem to make much sense but show high precision. And weren't there 20,000 urns found in Saqqara? Now the question of the design of the antechamber. I puzzled long and hard over the antechamber. This process took 21 years. I'm a real slow learner, but the antechamber was a real puzzle to me. But then, when we started to work with sound and understanding how you can actually maximize the throughput of energy, or maximize the response of the king's chamber, you would need to filter out extraneous sound, because all that does is confuse the signal and create noise. And so the explanation for the antechamber is that it was an acoustic filter. And the distance between these blocks, and these have been removed, I know you won't find them there, but there is this particular block here. But if you've got a sound wave coming through here, it's going to correspond to the bottom of these blocks right here. And those sound waves that do not correspond to the bottom of the block get filtered out. And the reason for the half-round cutouts in the what they call the wainscoting is so that they can actually tweak the system. Just like we tweak musical instruments today, or we actually tweak the sound suppressors on jet engines. There has to be an adjustment. And so what we have now is an answer, or possible answer, for the antechamber, which was totally enigmatic and a real puzzle. And Borchardt gave a theory that is fairly close. His theory was that the slots in the walls actually did house the blocks that were slid down after King Khufu was interred there, and then that allowed them to seal off the tomb. But we have not found, nobody has found these particular items. There's a lot that is missing out of the Great Pyramid, a lot. And a lot of it could be related to the explosion and the fire. I imagine inside the Great Pyramid, when that happened, that anything that could have been burned was. Some of the materials that would work extremely well as resonators in areas that in the Grand Gallery where there's not the high elevated temperatures could be wood or something similar to wood, just like a guitar. They respond very well to vibration. And this is a part of the holistic aspect of the Giiza power plant, is that it is a holistic system. It's taking clean energy and transferring it, or transducing it. And now we get into the fun stuff. Okay, we've got vibration, we've got electromagnetic radiation. The granite is vibrating, absorbing freely absorbing the energy that is coming through the passageway into the king's chamber. And it's emitting a signal, a very high power signal. That high power signal is reacting with the hydrogen. Hydrogen is the simplest atom in the universe. It has one proton and one electron. And atomic hydrogen in the universe is the cause of microwave radiation that is bombarding the Earth at all times. And the frequency of the wavelength of hydrogen is about 21 centimeters, or 8.309 inches. Now, that's significant. If hydrogen has a wavelength of 8.309 inches, what would be a suitable waveguide for that particular frequency? What would its dimensions be? Well, a waveguide for microwave radiation, the optimal waveguide has the length of the wavelength, which would in this case be 8.309 inches, and the height of the waveguide would be approximately half of the width. And what we have in the northern shaft in the Great Pyramid is a waveguide channeling microwave radiation into the king's chamber. It has the dimensions of a waveguide, and the only thing that is missing out of that waveguide, out of those shafts, is a metal liner, because you would need a metal liner to reduce the loss. It would not be able to transmit without a metal liner. So you ask the question, what kind of metal? And a piece of evidence turned up when they were blasting on the near the southern shaft in the Great Pyramid, and what they found was an iron plate. They claimed that it was actually original to the building of the pyramids, and a recent analysis of this iron plate, and the ancient Egyptians weren't supposed to have iron, but an analysis revealed that it was not meteoric iron, it was not the Ben stone, it was smelted. Not just that, they found something else, that on one surface there were traces of gold. It's brilliant. What a conductor. You won't have any loss. So that's it, but that's the only evidence that there may have been, or that there were metal liners in the shafts. What happened to the rest of it? I don't know. Okay, so we've got a signal coming from outer space into this waveguide. It's coming into the Great Pyramid, into the king's chamber. Then what happens? You've got hydrogen in the chamber, and it's pumped to a higher energy level through the energy emitted by the granite. It's harmonically matched to the frequency of the hydrogen. The pyramid is actually harmonically matched to the frequency of the hydrogen. So you pump the hydrogen to a higher energy state, what you have is a condition where you could get a population inversion, or you could actually stimulate emission of that electron, because as you pump hydrogen to a higher energy level, the electron goes to a higher orbit around the proton, or the proton. So you have an electron that is absorbed this energy. Now, under natural circumstances, that electron would eventually fall back to ground state. And while doing so, it would give up a little packet of energy, a photon. And that photon would be of a particular frequency. And it would travel at a particular, and in waves in a particular wavelength. And that wavelength is 8.4 inches, or 8.309 inches. So what this is then is an input signal into the chamber that goes through the chamber, stimulates emission in the hydrogen that's contained within the chamber, and carries that energy out through the southern shaft. Now, it's very unusual, well, maybe it's not unusual, but if you look at the features of the southern shaft, the opening in the southern shaft, it's shaped like a microwave horn antenna. Oh, I see some startled look on people's faces here, but we'll go there and you will see the northern shaft is shaped like a microwave horn antenna, cut right into the granite. And then it just shoots off at a 45-degree angle. So what you have then is energy input, acoustic energy, and hydrogen input, the acoustic filter, you have the resonant chamber, you have a input signal coming from the outside of the pyramid, going through the chamber, collecting the energy that's being generated in that chamber, and then feeding it through the southern shaft. How much energy? I was asked that question the other night. I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. Some people have suggested that, well, was it to guide spaceships down to Earth? Could it be used for that? My answer was, it could be used as a lighthouse, sure. Microwave radiation is just, you know, a little lower in frequency than the wavelength of light, and lighthouses guide ships into shore. So could it be used as that? Yeah. But it could also be used as a power plant. It could also be used to supply energy to a civilization. How do they transmit that energy? I think I've got my slides mixed up. I've already been through this. I'm sorry. Okay. We'll get back to that question later. In 1993, Rudolf Gantenbrink explored the southern shaft in the Queen's Chamber. And there, he revealed to the world more evidence to support the power plant theory. What he revealed at the end of the southern shaft was that it was blocked by a piece of limestone, and through the limestone were two copper fittings. And the copper fittings were actually bent down. What they were there for, we don't know. One of the interesting things about the video that I was looking at, about the exploration of the southern shaft, was in the lower part of the southern shaft, and it looked like it was eroded, and there were striations, horizontal striations, which makes sense if you're feeding hydrochloric acid, or a dilute solution of hydrochloric acid is going to react to the limestone. But as the robot climbed higher in the southern shaft, the walls smoothed out, and the precision was clearly evident in that particular shaft. But at the lower portions, it was very rough and eroded. And there's a difference between the southern shaft and the northern shaft that you'll see if we get into that chamber. In the southern shaft, the limestone is white. And in the northern shaft, it is stained. And there is a staining also in the niche. Evidence of a chemical reaction, or the deposit of chemicals, because in the niche, what we would have had would be a cooling tower or an evaporation tower, so that as the two liquids come together and pool on the floor of the Queen's Chamber, they are wicked through a particular material that's housed in the niche. So the theory that I had even before Gantenbrink found this door was that they were feeding chemicals into the chamber, but they had to do it at a required rate. I mean, it had to be a metered rate. And what kind of controls would they have used to assure themselves that just a precise amount of chemical was fed into that chamber? Well, you could actually use a a very, very small hole in a limestone block and predict that under a certain head pressure or weight of the column of liquid, a certain amount would actually feed through into the chamber. But you had to keep the shaft full. You couldn't allow that liquid or that chemical to drop or lower. And that's the reason for the copper fittings. And it's also the reason for the grapnel hook and the cedar-like wood, which were joined together and were floating on the top. And when the level of the fluid dropped, the contact between the grapnel hook and the copper fittings on the door was broken, signaling for more fluid to be pumped up into that shaft. Also, you'll note, underneath this door is a very small gap and a notch on the side. And you may ask the question, why, if they're feeding chemicals into that, is that hole not no bigger than just a very small slot? And the answer to that question is that when you're feeding a fluid out of a very, very small crack, such as through the plate, the limestone going into the Queen's chamber, when you're feeding fluid through a very, very small crack, you only need a very, very small crack to replenish that supply. That makes sense? So what's behind Gantenbrink's door, the mystery of the century? This is what we're all asking. What is behind Gantenbrink's door? And I'd love for whoever has penetrated that, if they have yet, I'd love to know what they found. What I propose is behind Gantenbrink's door is a vertical shaft that goes down to a bedrock chamber underneath the pyramid, and these are on the northern shaft and also the southern shaft. But these vertical shafts go down beneath the pyramid to a bedrock chamber where the equipment was housed to mix the chemicals if they were mixing them, supply the water, and feed it up to the shafts so that they can create hydrogen in it. And then behind Gantenbrink's door, you would find more copper cables, because they would have to go down also to the chamber in the bedrock and signal the pump, whatever kind of pumping mechanism they had, to deliver more water or more chemical. So I'm going on record today at the Egypt conference of the New Millennium to say that when they finally penetrate Gantenbrink's door, they'll find something like this or something very similar to it. And we need to know. Well, I could be all wet. But I don't think I am. I think they will find that. So what we have is a geomechanical power plant drawing energy from the earth, transferring that energy to electromagnetic radiation, interacting with hydrogen, an input signal, amplification of that signal, massive amount of power going through the southern shaft. Clean energy, holistic energy. We're not burning fossil fuels. We're not splitting atoms. We've never been able to fuse atoms in a very controlled fashion. Well, maybe some people would argue that. Oh, question has always been, how was the energy transmitted? How did they use it? And this is not somewhere that I wanted to go. I mean, I didn't want to go to space satellites. I wanted to end my research at the exit point of the southern shaft and say, you figure it out. However, my publisher said, use your imagination. And I said, I don't need to use my imagination. I know how they have proposed that it would be done today. All I need to do is just tell how it would be done today. And that would be with a relay satellite. This is one option, just one option. Once you have energy, there are many ways that you can use it to transmit it. But in this particular case, this is one possible option. And then, when I met Norman Cohan in Santa Barbara with my good friend Stephen Mailer, he looked at me and he said, well, you know, Sitchin said that they had space satellites back in ancient Egypt. I said, what? Yes, they had space satellites. What do you think the eye is? The eye in the sky. And I looked at that. I've never been able to look at the eye the same again since I heard that. And I'm thinking, is this what people were seeing? A satellite parked in geosynchronous orbit, transferring energy down to another point on the Earth? Is this where all the tools are, where that energy is being directed to? Were the ancient Khemitians actually selling power to the Atlanteans? Because this is real, I mean, this is a real proposal. It has technical difficulties associated with it. But I read a study that was made by the people of Iceland, the engineers of Iceland. They have an abundance of energy, geothermal energy, and they want to sell it. They want to sell that energy. I mean, they have free heat in their homes. They've just got an abundance of energy. And one of the proposals that they came up with was this proposal right here, that they convert that energy to microwave energy and bounce it off a satellite. Another proposal, too, is to convert solar energy from one part of the Earth to microwaves and bounce it off a satellite to farm it at another point on the Earth. Because some areas of the Earth are blessed with sunshine every day, others are not so fortunate, like my hometown, Manchester, England, where it rains every day for months. So this is technology that has been discussed, it has been proposed, and even today we beam microwaves off satellites. We do it all the time. Giiza does it when he uses his telephone. However, and also Nikola Tesla, he proposed a method of the wireless transmission of energy using higher frequencies and microwaves rather than the 50 hertz that we use today. And with that method, you can actually transfer energy and activate appliances remotely. You can activate them without wires. And we can't do that. Why? Because you can put a meter on a microwave. You couldn't put a meter on a microwave, and the investors had already invested in power plants, and Tesla's idea didn't really get off the ground, and that's a shame. He had a facility called Wardenclyffe Tower that he built and demonstrated that you could transfer energy through the atmosphere and the Earth. Well, that's kind of a fun, funky graphic, don't you think? And that's yours truly going up the southern shaft. And now I'll answer any questions that you have. Yes, ma'am. The question was, what about the other two pyramids? What do I think they were there for? I think what drove the Egyptians to this technology, how it evolved to the state that they're in, or the state that it's in the Great Pyramid, was a very pragmatic, makes a lot of sense idea that if they had a device, they could actually alleviate the effects of earthquakes. And what happens is when you are drawing that mechanical energy out of the earth and you have an oscillator that's vibrating at a frequency of the earth, you're actually relieving the stresses in the earth, and that is what causes an earthquake, the built-up stresses, where the plates come together and then there's a sudden shift. But if you're able to have a device that can draw that energy out over time, rather than allowing it to build up to a level of destruction, then you could stabilize the mantle and have no fear of earthquakes anymore.
So you don't see them as additional power plants?
That's possible. I don't really analyzed them to the degree that I have the Great Pyramid. But I think that there is a relationship there because they all seem to have the same common feature. And that common feature is the descending passage to a bedrock chamber. And I would speculate that that bedrock chamber housed the equipment, a part of the equipment that drove the pyramid or primed the pyramid to oscillation. And what I would suspect that they were driving it to oscillation by a reverse pole, and actually had anti-gravity, where they were able to nullify the effects of gravity. And should we talk about that a little bit? Yeah. Okay. There's a chapter in my book. It's called The Mystery of Coral Castle. Coral Castle is a place in Florida. It's in Homestead, Florida. And it was built by a very mysterious gentleman by the name of Ed Lee Scanlon. Ed Lee Scanlon was a student of the universe. He claimed, Ed claimed, that he knew the secrets of how the pyramids of Egypt were built. And to prove his point, he succeeded in single-handedly raising 30-ton blocks of coral, 22-ton blocks of coral. And not just one. Over his lifetime, he was able to put together, quarry and put in place 1,100 tons of quarried rock. 1,100 tons. Now, when you calculate, this is one guy working single-handedly over a 28-year period. But when you calculate how many people it would take to build a Great Pyramid, and you base your calculations on his work, it would only take about 4,700 people to build the Great Pyramid. And yet the estimates for the builders of the Great Pyramid range from 20,000 to 100,000. But two, what we have is the time elements involved. I think it was Richard Noon. He actually went to an expert in quarrying, a fellow by the name of Merle Bucker in Indiana. And Merle Bucker was asked by Richard to provide a quote on how long it would take to deliver enough stone to build the Great Pyramid. Merle came back. He was obsessed with this idea. And he worked very hard. He died of cancer shortly after, but he worked very hard to provide the answer to Richard. And the answer was that utilizing all 33 Indiana limestone quarries, tripling their output, assuming that there weren't going to be any equipment failures, any labor strife or shortage, it would take 27 years to deliver the stone for the Great Pyramid. 27 years. And that's just delivering it. Next, we have to put it into place. And that's just limestone. That's not granite. That's just limestone. So, with Ed Lee Scanlon, you have a technology. Ed had a technology. And if anybody is in Homestead, Florida, you need to take the opportunity to go see what he was doing, because he had the secrets of the Great Pyramid. Not modern academics that go out on the Giiza Plateau and raise one-ton blocks or drag them up ramps and put them into place. That does not answer the more difficult aspects of the work. And that's what you have to do for any theory on how the Great Pyramid was built. Any theory has to replicate the more difficult aspects of the work. Otherwise, it doesn't answer anything. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I have a question. If the Great Pyramid was using satellites for energy, what could have happened to those satellites?
I think their orbits would have degraded eventually, and they would have fell to Earth, burned up, probably. It's hard to say. Yes, ma'am.
Could the satellite be on Mars, another pyramid?
I don't go there. I haven't seen the evidence.
Talk to this yet.
Yes.
Yeah, Lee Scanlon, in that speculation, how you understood the way the ley lines work?
Yes, his idea was that there were certain properties to that particular area that were necessary for him to accomplish what he did. For a different reason, yes. For actually being close to seismic areas that have a heavy seismic activity. Oh, I'm sorry. The question was about Edward Lee Scanlon and whether he was positioned his coral castle near a ley line for the unique properties, and the answer was yes, I believe that was true. Also, the pyramids and other sacred sites around the world are located near ley lines and near high energy centers. So it was intentional. They did know about this energy, where it was maximized, and tapped into it. Yes, sir.
Based on your theory on in the main chamber, the diorite box, what
Yeah.
was that accomplished?
The granite box is a puzzle too, and there's, I believe, some things that are missing there, and I'm glad you asked that question because I failed to cover that. The other mystery with the granite box, well, sarcophagus as it's called, is that it's a different colored granite than the rest of the granite. It's chocolate brown rather than red, or pink Aswan granite. And it also has been severely damaged. And the popular theory, the traditional theory, is that it was beat by stone, people chipping things off. However, everybody who has looked at it, who knows something about stone and construction, I've said that it has the appearance of being actually melted or affected by heat. And most of the stones on the inside of the Great Pyramid were actually affected by heat in some way. But as far as the box goes and its purpose, there are some features about the box that are very unusual. It has a concave surface on 3 sides. And I did not include this data in my book because I have not verified it yet, but it's also convex on the inside. So what you could have with such a device is a possibly, and I'm saying possibly, an amplifier for the signal, or some kind of a device to control it or amplify the signal coming in.
Have you thought about trying to build a model of this thing? And make it work?
I've thought about it for many years. You got a few $1 billion I could borrow?
We'll take up the collection after
You will, thanks.
I think laser theory of cutting the rock has been shut down, and so maybe could microwaving have cut the rock instead of having interference?
No, because, well, I'm sorry. The question was, could the microwaves be responsible for cutting the rock, or microwaving cut the rocks? I would say in the respect that it affected the condition of the rock or the granite coffer, yes, that's possible. Could it be used to actually quarry rock and cut rock squarely? No, I don't believe that, because it is still a form of electromagnetic radiation, or like a laser, and it's a thermal process. And we did cover that yesterday. Yes, sir.
I have a question concerning the lighting inside the pyramid. Have you ever heard anything or got any information about how the ancients would have lit the inside of the pyramid?
The question is, how would the ancients have lit the inside of the Great Pyramid? And you know, I really don't want to get into any radical theories today. I want to stay with pure science. But they had the technology, and you know, we have light bulbs today. I'm sure they had light bulbs back in ancient Egypt or ancient Khemit.
Do you feel like that there's been machinery removed from the pyramid?
It could be a combination of both. Oh, the question is, do I feel that there has been machinery removed from the Great Pyramid? It could be a combination of destruction and removal. Originally, there was a lot of destruction through an explosion in the King's Chamber, the forces in the King's Chamber. But following that, maybe there was an attempt to repair it. Some people have speculated that there was indeed an attempt to repair. I don't believe that they ever accomplished. I think after that particular explosion, the pyramid stayed silent from then on.
Has anyone calculated at the end of the rainbow if that energy was transmitted to a satellite in geocentric orbit? Has anybody calculated where that would go after it was?
The question is, has anybody ever calculated where the energy, if it was indeed being beamed from a satellite, would go? And you cannot really answer that, because even coming out of the Great Pyramid, there would have to be some kind of adaptive optics or array to be able to compensate for the refraction of the atmosphere, the different layers of the atmosphere, to actually hit a satellite in geosynchronous orbit. Because the time of the day, the humidity, there's so many factors involved that you could not say that because of this angle in this shaft, they were hitting this point in space. Because that beam would actually go like this. You know how when the sun rises in the morning and sets at night, it's a lot bigger than when it's up in the sky at noon. And that's because of the refraction of light as it strikes the atmosphere at an angle. So, and how would you predict where it would go? You could go anywhere. it could be reflected to a point outside the Great Pyramid 2 feet away, or it could be reflected to the Americas or anywhere. Yes, Jerry.
It seems like the energy is so unpredictable due to like sunspot activity and tilt of the earth and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Would there have been like servo or feedback mechanism that control the oscillations or people out of control or
Another point. Yeah.
mechanically move those things?
I've got this is a very, very good question. The question is, for any system, you need to have some controls, because with something that is responding to vibration, and if it's left freely to vibrate without any controls, it could eventually destroy itself. So at resonance, the Great Pyramid, if it was left to vibrate, or it absorbs too much energy at one time, it could literally shake apart. So that is what I believe they used the granite blocks in the ascending passage for, that up the ascending passage they were sending a signal. There's 3 ways that you can reduce vibration in a system. You can turn off the power source. You can dampen the vibration mechanically, like in a piano where you have these dampeners. Or you could cancel the sound out by using an out-of-phase frequency or an out-of-phase signal that would actually cancel out the vibration or the waves, or just confuse them and reducing the actual power output. So what I've proposed is, because of the accessibility to the inside and not desiring any mechanical or moving parts, which you would need with dampeners, and obviously you can't turn the power source off, nor would you want to, that's the Earth, that they were actually using out-of-phase sound waves, and they were directing them up the ascending passage to control the vibrations on the inside. And also the sound coming back and striking those granite blocks, granite plugs, will be your feedback mechanism. Good question.
For speculation, if you could reproduce your pyramid, how much energy could it be? Could it be to Africa? I mean, how much power could this be?
The question is, how much power would the Great Pyramid put out if you were able to reproduce it? And I don't have an answer to that. I did talk to one guy about my theory who said that would put out gigawatts of power. I don't know. It was just a swag. And I think there's so many variables. It's just like when you buy a car, you know, and you say how many horsepower it is, and you can't always predict how fast it's going to go until you get it out on the road. Good question. Stephen just passed to me the wall carvings of Dendera that show that there are representations carved in the walls of ancient Egypt of technology, typically interpreted as being symbolic, cultic. But in my book you'll see that the device that I compare it to is a Crookes tube. And the Crookes tube is really a cathode ray tube, and was a precursor to the X-rays. That's what they discovered X-rays with. So when they say, where are the machines? We say, go to Dendera and take a look at them. Thanks, Stephen. Yes, Josh.
It seems to be no question if those nodes are copper. Everyone says they're copper. How do we know they're copper?
I think just by the appearance of them. Yeah, really.
You'd also need to have some kind of, assuming those pyramids are really old, some way of stopping the rain from getting in those shafts. I'm sure water would interfere with water.
Yeah, yeah. Well, actually, there are many ways of preventing water to get in the shafts if you have a need to do that.
And what are the dimensions of the cedar wood, a piece of wood? That has to be pretty substantial float to weight on it.
The dimensions, the question is, what are the dimensions of the cedar-like wood? Do you have those dimensions? I don't have the dimensions.
And that just floated in the liquid.
That's what I'm proposing. Yeah. It needs to be tested. Good question, no? Very good questions. Yes, Tim? You reading my mind? Sorry? Yes, the question was, could the explosion be the result of a meteor impact on the Earth? And to answer that question, I would say yes. And really, it's something that I have thought about, that when you walk around the pyramids, when you walk on the Giiza Plateau, when you look at the Pyramid of Meidum, they have the appearance of just being shaken apart. Just shaken, literally shaken apart. And so we know that there have been catastrophes in the past. We know that there have been meteorites strike the Earth. And what would happen if you had a system of power that was utilizing Earth energies, and then suddenly there was a large influx of energy, such as a meteor striking it. So, a big spike, and probably not enough for the system to respond. Yeah, good question, Tim. Is there anything else I forgot? Thanks. Sorry I took so long.
I want to thank Christopher for coming so far and in helping us to understand more about the technology. Before we break for lunch, Ivy has a couple of things she wants to talk about, and then Alan Alfred will be back with a little bit more about the things that he was talking about yesterday. So here's Ivy.
Yeah, you want to mention that, Chris? Come on up.
Hello?